Good afternoon or morning, alchemists. Thank you for joining us in this second We Are Alchemists session. Today, we are really excited to be introducing Andrew Smith, who's one of our advisors. Andrew has an absolute wealth of experience, and we are incredibly excited to have him on board. And joining Andrew, you've got Ben, obviously, calling in from a shed, and Charlie as well, and of course me, Neil. So I thought the easiest thing for us to do would be for me to give Andrew the floor for a couple of minutes just to introduce himself and talk about his experience and hopefully why he was interested about why Alkimi was an interesting prospect for him to become an advisor for us. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, all. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'm more than excited about what Alkimi is doing. I think there's quite a lot of promise in the vision, and to be a part of it, I think is awesome for me. To give some background, I'm pretty old. I got into digital media. Got into digital media basically when digital media started. In fact, my first foray into the space was desktop publishing before websites. I started a magazine in 1993 that I since ran for almost 20 years. Did a bunch of other stuff along the way. We launched our website in 1995. So I've seen a lot of transformation over the years. I've spent a lot of time both as a publisher, but also in the ad tech realm, sometimes somewhere in the middle. And, my journey basically went from, the web being something that publishers did, and digital video being something that publishers did as sort of a side gig, until really, the end of 2000, the 2000s, when 2008 really was the inflection point for print into digital media, and digital media really started taking off at that point because market crashed, print magazines became unsustainable. They were the bread and butter for many publishers. I don't think people really realized that, until then. And then digital really started taking off. And that's sort of the beginning of my heavy involvement in the space is around that 2008, 2009 time period. And so, after selling my business, I went over to Vice Media, where I ran ad product and ad operations over there for 4 years. I thought, sort of a really great time for Vice because they were expanding so heavily. They were acquiring, they were launching new sites, they were publishing in 17 languages. And so being a publisher in the digital space that is really an important part of, my background with ad tech, because a publisher gets exposed to everything, right? They see all the solutions, they have to understand and support all of the solutions. So every measurement company, every targeting company, every audience, DMP or CDP type business, analytics, other things like that, those were all in the wheelhouse. So got a really good broad education, spent a lot of time learning about the solutions, adopting some. One of the things we brought on board was Grapeshot, which is a UK-based company that specialized in content categorization. And for advice, we integrated them to categorize 17 languages worth of content. We did it actually before. I think most people think of a company like Grapeshot, they think about brand safety. And really, we were integrating them to categorize in multiple languages so we could generate first-party data. That was around 2015. And then around 2016, brand safety happened. The market woke up. There were a lot of, a couple key incidences. Grapeshot took off. GDPR happened as well shortly thereafter. Identity started becoming more of a constrained concept, and contextual became, really the wind in the sails for that platform. And I saw their success and I jumped on board. And that was the inflection point when it went from publishing to ad tech. And spent a short period of time at Grapeshot, and then they were acquired by Oracle. And that really kind of, was interesting, going from a really agile startup to, sort of the big leagues of ad tech. But I missed the small company days. So now I'm back at Openslate as chief product officer. We spend a lot of time looking at contextual through the lens of social media and video. So we have a pretty unique set of skills and technology. I think it's something that is still just being developed, whereas open web now is, there's quite a lot of maturity there. Perhaps though, with the exception of the exchange model for open web, right, where we see a lot of stuff going on in that space that I think can be improved. My background's always been in technology, from desktop publishing all the way through contextual targeting. I did dabble a little bit in the crypto world.
I was going to say, yeah, because I think it's pretty clear that you are a publishing OG. But yeah, we've had a few chats about how you got into crypto in the early days, and I think given the nature of our project, and we're on a blockchain, we're on Constellation's blockchain, it'd be good to kind of let the people listening know what you love about blockchain, how you got into it in the first place.
Yeah. So a lot of friends in the Bay Area were into Bitcoin from an early stage. And a friend who was buying coffee with Bitcoin, that whole urban.
It's an expensive coffee.
It was a good deal at that time, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like, shit, okay. Here's a $40,000 coffee nowadays. But some friends that I think mostly didn't make it, in the crypto world. I actually had a run with it myself, where got a milk crate, bought the most expensive GPUs I could find, installed Linux and strapped it all together and threw a fan on top and built myself a Litecoin mining rig. And I have to say that was super fun. It was nice. Expensive from electricity perspective, but just tuning the machine, getting that going. I think it broke even at that point. But it was a lot of fun, and it taught me a lot about the space and the possibilities as well.
Absolutely. And I think Charlie, Neil and I are over the moon. And I think kind of given your experience, your involvement in publishing and blockchain, it's amazing to have you on board advising us with where Alkimi Exchange could go in the future, how we can address the issues that we currently see in the market, which are plentiful at the moment. I think we were briefly talking before we jumped on the call about the recent news with Google pushing back the impending cookie apocalypse, which I think is quite interesting. I think it maybe goes to show that perhaps them pushing the market around wasn't quite as easy as they anticipated, and they've realized that they have to work more closely with the people in the chain that are providing value, so the advertisers, publishers, and users largely, which a lot of the stories around how they handle data come from, is that your and I data and how that's managed by Google. So it's interesting to see from our point of view anyway, that cookies are going to be around for a bit longer. And obviously cookies are similar to contextual targeting, but I guess almost the antithesis somewhat, whereby rather than looking at behavior, you're looking at the actual context of the content that is around an ad that you may serve. And it'd be good, Andrew, if you kind of talk us through your opinion on the cookie versus context, how they play together, if they don't, if they do, just your thoughts on where that's going, where it's been, and kind of the future for it.
Yeah, I think the cookie will, clearly it's going to continue to play a role. I think other identifiers will continue to play a role in the ad tech ecosystem. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that there is some extended time frame to get sort of identity-based targeting. But I think the overall sort of direction that most people have been thinking around, is that the ability to target a device or a household is going to be diminished over time. I think that, even though we have that announcement with Google, extending the life of the cookie, that's only a fraction of, it's a large portion, but still not everything when it comes to what's addressable from an identity perspective, from a device perspective, right? Still have a lot of, we still have the iOS 14 situation that happened with the mobile world. I think that I think identity-based targeting is always going to exist in some shape or form, right? And there'll be ways for platforms and publishers to be able to support that. I think where contextual comes in is kind of bridging the gap between the known and the unknown. There's even a space and an overlap for those two things to play a part together.
Definitely. I think that the Apple, you kind of touched on it, but the Apple news for me is quite interesting because they're removing a lot of the traditional identifiers that you would have for finding users. But not only that, just the general logistics of serving an ad, right? If for example, in Safari, the IP address goes, you may be in a situation where I'm sat in the UK, I'm fortunate enough to be in the Cotswolds and the sun's come out, and there's no way that anyone would know that. And I might then see an ad that was in French, which for an advertiser is totally wasted because I don't understand French. And I think that's where contextual targeting might be quite key, because if you understand the language in which a certain piece of content is written, it then may give you a pretty strong idea of whereabouts that person is located, or at least the language they understand. So I think logistically, context is very key. And in a previous life, I worked for a company called ShareThrough, which was a native ad exchange. And we quite often talked about this idea of an editorial halo. So this idea, when you have an ad set next to good, powerful editorial content, it actually has the effect of improving the engagement on that particular ad unit. And I think, as we move forward, as there are these big changes in this Game of Thrones of the kind of big tech players that's going on at the moment, I think context and serving ads against content that is relevant is really going to come to the fore and provide advertisers with a very meaningful way to deliver ads. I mean, Neil, I'd be interested to hear from you in your time at Mindshare if contextual targeting was on your radar back then, kind of the benefits that you saw from contextual targeting and how that might continue to grow into the future.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much on my radar, but given the fact that I worked for a Group M company and one of Group M's flagship products was essentially contextual, right? And in terms of the targeting capabilities that product had. So context is always key for us. But that idea of getting content and context together and working symbiotically is it's kind of the dream of most media planners, to ensure that you're putting the right content on the right page in front of the right audience. We used other tools to try and build out so strong contextual planning, as well as trying to use as much identity as we could, whether that was geo, whether it was cookie, whether it was something from a demand side platform, and then kind of wrap that up with dynamic creative that we were delivering. So working with Celtra, for example, to ingest those data points and ensure, based on the signals that we had, that the right creative was going on screen. But that was a real utopian view, and quite often you end up going fairly myopic, I think, down the route of data, particularly with cookies. And I think really interesting tweet I saw last night. As of yesterday, the Trade Desk finished up 16%, Magnite up 10%, Pubmatic up 13%, Criteo up 11% to a new 52-week high, and LiveRamp up 9% as well. And I think that just shows kind of the underlying market sentiment that these big ad tech businesses that have been saying that they are making their own identity play might not be as far along with creating that as perhaps they're saying they are. And this kind of 2-year stay of execution basically is given another breath of fresh air into the market. But I think the positive sentiment that comes out of this is the fact that the super tanker has already started being turned, right? Like I think mindsets have started changing, and people aren't just focusing as much on cookie and on one identifier as they were perhaps in the past.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the general sentiment that I've, in the chatter that I've been looking at in the last 24 hours is that, oh, good, now we have some time to get it right, because we were basically fucking it up before this, know. So, and so that's fair enough, right? I mean, I'm still of the mindset that the ability to provide identification is going to be restricted, and that so getting it right is important, but it's going to look different than it ever had. In some ways, I think it could actually improve the identity space, because if identifiers can be more accurate than cookies, I don't know if any of you have ever looked yourselves up in a third-party data platform's directory in terms of your device. You can see the categories you fall into from a cookie perspective.
I've done that on Google, actually.
Bad.
Yeah, it's a bit of a laugh, to be honest with you, sometimes. I like to keep it that way and see the ads that come in, for sure.
Yeah. So, I think it's an imperfect science that needs to be perfected, and it needs to be also transparent with the user, and one of the things and the reason I'm in the contextual space is exactly that, right? It's that Contextual does an amazing job of protecting the user, right? Like, coming from the publishing perspective, my customer was an audience, right? Like, and generating an audience had the most value, and treating that audience with care and treating them with respect was something that was high on my priority list, but it also made business sense. And I think with contextual advertising, it's 100% ethically aligned for the most part. I think you can do stupid things with it, but tracking people and delivering ads without their knowledge or consent is something that I think will be a thing of the past.
I think so, and I think for me that context has kind of had its case made for it over the history of advertising, right? Like if I think about the billboards at Leicester Square in London, or Piccadilly Circus rather, that is an ad in a particular context, and you have certain people that will view those ads, and people still spend money on that today. And I think the same thing for magazines. That was a context, and you saw people that a type of person that you thought was going to see, you didn't know exactly. And I think that one of the best and worst things about digital advertising is the granularity of the reporting. Like, it's because it's there, you want every single thing you need, but it's actually, do you need all of that data? It's about parsing what's important. And I think largely what you see float to the top there is the content it was served around, what that then meant for the sentiment of the ad, and that user reading that content at any one time.
Yeah, no, I think putting it in a three-dimensional context, drawing a three-dimensional picture is an important way to visualize what context really can do. Contextual advertising, right? Because I wrote about this in Ad Age recently, and a couple other things that I've posted recently about this, but I've used a Times Square analogy, right? A billboard in Times Square is much different than a billboard in the back alley somewhere. Where you are in the Cotswolds, right? And like that picture, like, I think one of the things that people get, they sort of minimize the power of contextual advertising because they think about it as it's basically subject matter, right? Like, is this content safe or unsafe? Is this content about something that's relevant to my brand? But if you really blow it out and think about it, it's also like, well, what's the literal environment that the user is in, right? Like, what's that page look like, or that player look like? What's the share of page? Like, how, and then some of the things that we do at Openslate, I think, which is really fascinating and super important, is we don't just understand like what that piece of content is about. Because we're in social media, that content is linked to a creator, is linked to an audience, right? And there's what I like to think of as a conversation going on, right? Content is consumed for a reason. It's because of who created it. It's because of the mindset of the person reading it. It's also can be heavily engaged with. It can be something that's long tail and off onto the side, right? Like that back alley example, right? So who made the content is really important. Is this content highly engaged? Are we in a clean, well-lit environment? And what's the overall quality of that environment is really what people should be thinking about when they're thinking about contextual. And subject matter plays a role into that, but so does the engagement. And creator-based context is something that is super important, not only for social media like we do, because we're doing that on from an Openslate perspective, but there's a huge demand for diversity, equity, and inclusion in this space. The ability to responsibly identify creators and allow advertisers to invest in those creators, just another use case for contextual being like one of the more sort of, I think ethically sound ways of approaching the advertising industry.
I totally agree with that. And I think to kind of tie it into a future that we at Alkimi Exchange, and we've talked about, Andrew, where blockchain and marketing and advertising sit together in a much nicer way before, particularly with Constellation's hypergraph that now allows us to have more and more data sets interoperable to provide advertisers with a better means of finding that context. I think that given that as we move towards this kind of world where you have an advertising auction host on the blockchain, you have complete transparency of data, that's only going to make contextual solutions even more compelling. If there's more data sets to read from, if there's more ways to action those data sets, you're going to get a much, much tighter, more effective product for finding the right context for the right advertiser, which is being read by the right person to kind of achieve that advertiser's goal. So I, for one, am excited about your experience in contextual targeting. And even though the cookie apocalypse has been pushed back 2 years, I think we're in a very strong position as a decentralized advertising exchange to take advantage of solutions that you're helping build at the moment.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that's really exciting for me about the Alkimi technology is the idea that you can create, these indelible records that link back to, to finite concepts, right? So one of the biggest challenges with contextual advertising is providing an identifier, which is ironic when you think about it, because ID-based targeting that's also a challenge, right? Like when you have a website, you have a URL, right? And then that acts as the identifier, but that URL can change. That URL also can be delivered through the exchange as either truncated or something else, and it resolves to a different type. It resolves to a different identifier, basically. And so there are hops along the chain within the exchange that don't give you that clean connection with the content and the identification of that content. And I think that's one of the things that can really supercharge contextual through the concept of using the Constellation hypergraph. I think that there's a lot of parts of the world, of the digital advertising space that are outside of the open web that are very hard to identify. You have app IDs. That's something there, but it's I think it's there's room for improvement. You have video that can be delivered absent of a URL in a digital player or other things like that, has no identifier that can necessarily be tracked or resolved to. So I think providing a mechanism for identity to be passed in a secure and accurate fashion is something that I think that is a big part of the promise of what Alkimi is doing.
Absolutely, yeah, because that the fraud that exists and URL spoofing, as you mentioned, is a part of that 20% that is lost and kind of or delivered in the wrong place and is of no value to an advertiser, as you say, with a immutable record of data with an identifier that once it's on the blockchain cannot be changed, is going to provide a really great means for building out solutions that target ads better. And I think even again, as we look even further to the future, I mean, a lot of websites will have a content management system. So the means by which content is delivered onto a page at a certain time. And if there's a future where there is a decentralized ID solution that is then interoperable with your content management system, you're then going to be able to build out very compelling, contextually relevant articles with then a contextually relevant ad that then gives you an experience very similar to what you see in the platforms, where it's algorithmically based feed of all the content that you love, no matter where you go, because you're taking your preferences with you to each individual website, and then the Alkimi Exchange is able to apply that to the feed that is built through the interoperability of data that's facilitated by the hypergraph to provide this experience that we all love on social platforms, right? But it's very difficult to deliver at scale and effectively, I think, on the open web. So again, it's giving publishers an extra string to their bow to compete with what are very good ad products released by the social platforms to the tune of billions of dollars. So it's, I think it's a case of providing more strength, providing more functionality for publishers who create this content to serve a product that is as good as what we see on other platforms.
No, I agree. I think that I haven't figured it out. I'm sure someone will, but with the whole eruption of NFTs, right? And the ability to assign ownership to a digital asset. I mean, think about the wealth of digital assets that publishers have, right? And the concept of NFT, I think, is very powerful. It's something that I think needs to be, done in a way that is supportive for the creator. I think a lot of creators have an opportunity to make not just money from selling their NFTs, but potentially having that, that ownership being transferred into any context, especially in an advertising sense. So I think that type of certification has the ability to track monetization, but also mitigate fraud. And I think there's something there with that piece. I think the NFT thing was the early days, and there's going to be a lot more with the way that the blockchain can empower publishers and content owners and creators.
It definitely is. It's a way of licensing your IP or digital IP or whatever it may be, which then in the future could provide a whole new revenue stream for publishers. And I think that it'll be interesting to see that play out in the future. I think it gets a bad-ish rep, I think, at the moment, NFTs, given that kind of their iterations to date. But I think for licensing, for perhaps procurement in the future as well, the application of NFTs will be pretty compelling as we move forward. So I think I guess we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but it would be interesting to hear from you, Andrew, if you had like a postcard from the future almost, where like, what's your utopian future of like, this is how ads are traded in 2022. I apologize, there's a biplane going over me. It's crazy in the countryside. I'm not used to this. Be interesting to kind of see what would be your perfect vision, I guess, and then what do you think is like likely to deliver without wanting to put you on the spot too much?
Well, I think in the future there needs to be, an ecosystem where you have the greatest amount of transparency. I think that's kind of obvious in some ways, but really, truly today, like that's not happening, right? Even in the platforms that are natively supported by some of the bigger players in the space outside of open web, I think there's room for improvement and transparency. We see that a lot, right? And on my side of the fence, I think transparency is in that future state needs to look like what content is about. I really truly understanding identity from an end-to-end, from a user perspective and also from a buyer perspective, right? So that there's a clean exchange, there's a clean agreement across the space there. I think transparency is a big theme. I think we will see a lot more of that. I think that's inevitable. It's going to take time. I think that another big theme in the future space is around the efficiencies that need to be in place in advertising. I think, and I mean that in a very broad sense. Like, I think that the it could look like the number of hops that a transaction takes to resolve to an ad spend, right? Which I know with Alkimi, that's one of the things that, you know, we're looking to solve, right? Is
Exactly
how can we make that handshake, you know, far more transparent, efficient, you know, from end to end, there's something there. But I also think like the efficiency of buying media and selling media is very poor right now.
Yeah, totally agree.
The controls that are in place tend to look like a bunch of siloed stuff that doesn't look like each other, like all the different other options, right? How I buy media here, here, and here looks completely different. And then as a seller, and I think, you know, I said this in my preamble about my extremely long career as a publisher, because I'm such an old man, that a publisher is literally losing their mind, you know, every single day because there's a new fraud solution, there's a new requirement for brand safety, there's a new XYZ, and it differs from agency to agency, you know? So I think some standardization in the space, but I also think like, you know, making it easier for publishers to sell media and having them having controls on the sell side that allow publishers to do more with less overhead required on their side, and, you know, less of sort of like an all hands on deck situation. Because I can tell you when you're selling media right now, you know, and it's been a minute since I've been in that seat, but I know a lot hasn't changed. Like, hell, we got cookies coming for another 2 more years, right? So like, you know, I think there's quite a lot that could improve from an efficiency standpoint in terms of buying and selling media, as well as the literal transaction and cleaning that up.
And I think so, because the efficiency is actually, it's quite an interesting point, because like the net of that for you and I as consumers and users of websites is that sometimes the page loads very slowly, that sometimes there's multiple ad trackers on page, and like oftentimes that's a requirement from a publisher, as you say, to sell to the individual agencies or partners or brands that they need to with their respective deals they have with respective partners, that ultimately is slowing down the internet browser, because there's so many third parties running on the back end to facilitate the ability for them to trade and make money to continue to operate. It's kind of this horrible, like, self-fulfilling prophecy that kind of spirals down and gets messier and messier and messier. And I think, yeah, as you say, with transparency will come efficiency, because you can then see, okay, these pipes aren't great, so we're going to move what we're doing out of those pipes and put them in here because we make more money, it's more efficient, means we can take those pipes away and make effective decisions on who they're selling to and why, and just waste less time, because with each one of those third-party tags comes a relationship with a person, comes an integration with a particular tech solution, and that amounts to time across various departments in a publisher, whether it's the legal team, development, commercial, ongoing account management. The inefficiencies do play out in a number of different ways that has significant impacts on just the experience of the internet. So it's, I think, yeah, it's two really good points, because they seem two very easy things to say, but when you really do play them out, you're like, holy shit, these do actually touch a lot of things in a lot of different ways, and yeah, ruin what is one of the greatest inventions of all time of the internet. I'd say ruin, but not make it as good as it could be. So I think, it's hugely important that is solved. And yeah, again, that's why we're all hugely excited about what's going to be possible with the Alkimi exchange in regard to transparency and efficiency, by being able to see exactly who's buying and selling your media, exactly which pipes work the best for you, and then, as you mentioned earlier, but products that we don't even know that exist yet that will be built on the Alkimi exchange that provide brand new efficiencies and even more compelling ways to sell advertisements with amazing context and efficiency to deliver a product that is better for ultimately the end user, the advertiser and the publisher, kind of re-establishing that symbiotic value exchange, which is somewhat lost at the moment, I think, with the way it is at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, the user experience on the open web is something that is unsustainable, I think, you know, and you know, I pay a subscription fee to some publishers, right, as a user, which I think works out, but that's only for a certain percentage of the top, the best of the best, right, or people that are incredibly well established in your niche. And if you're not in that group, you're going to have a difficult time driving revenues that way, and the advertising piece is crucial to you. But if your ads start, if you can't maintain the value of your sell side proposition, right? If what the inventory you're selling doesn't show value, it's going to continue to get lower and lower on the totem pole. And what I mean by that is that, it's important, I think, for the publisher inventory to start to show value, and to show that there's an accurate accounting of what that inventory actually looks like, so that the good actors, the ones that are providing useful and highly valuable content to users, are rewarded in a way where their advertising is monetized and in a fashion that isn't continuing to be degraded. And I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of rambling a little on that one, but it's really like how many ads can I jam on the page is basically what publishers are saying. In turn, that drives down the value of that page, it turns off users, et cetera. If you could certify the quality of that impression, that this is a highly engaged page, which I think is also part of what Context can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a reputable publisher, that it's a non-fraudulent impression, and that it had an impact, which I think is ultimately the end goal, right? Any kind of outcome that you can prove, and do that in a privacy compliant manner. Then you start saying, okay, let's turn off let's have one ad instead of four. Literally, one of the sites that I read is a cycling website. I spend a lot of time closing windows and navigating pop-ups just to read the little pieces of text. So that's just one of these things that I think we need to do for publishers, basically.
I totally agree, because it's like the publishers that you pay for were once publishers that you wouldn't pay for, right? And if that's the only solution for people to sustainably grow their advertising revenue, where do the next generation of small fledgling publishers come in, and how do they succeed? It's not through putting ads every 2 paragraphs, because that turns you off straight away, as you say. It's by respecting the user and understanding the true value of each individual page impression outside of a cookie associated to it, to give people the opportunity to find highly targeted users. Because it's like, okay, you could buy 10 million ad impressions on a large national newspaper, but you may be better served, for your instance, if you're specialized, by working with a smaller cycling blog, because that's going to be 10,000 people that read it and trust and jump when that article says jump, and not only to say jump, they say how high do I jump, where do I jump, what gear ratio do I jump in, all that kind of good stuff that goes along with it, right? So it's I think you're bang on with exactly what you're saying. It's, you've only
got to look at the way influencers make money from having a small, super engaged audience to know that is got value, and that has had value for advertisers, and they're showing at the moment. So it's got to work out.
I mean, I think that's the piece that's missing for the web, right? Like there's an indelible and unarguable connection between an influencer and their audience. It's right there for you to see as an advertiser, right? And you don't need proof, right? Whereas the web has grown in its own crazy way. It's called open web for a reason, right? It's sort of gone and gotten really wild and crazy in some ways. I think it's done some harm for that space, but it's also one of the true places where you can be an independent publisher or create a voice and allow information to travel freely to anyone who may be interested in consuming it. And I think that the thing that needs to happen there is to prove a similar connection to what you might see with an influencer, right? This is kind of getting back to what I was saying about contextual advertising. Is that contextual advertising shouldn't just be about that one piece of content atomized across the billions and billions of pieces of content that you could advertise against, right? But who created it? How highly engaged is it, right? Is this an influential piece, right? What do we know about where this person is when they're reading this ad, beyond just the subject matter of what they're reading? And I think a publisher with a strong offering should be rewarded and should be made transparent in terms of what it is that they're offering. And the buyer should be able to make that connection themselves and invest appropriately.
Yeah, Because I guess in the same way that influencers are like the de facto leader of particular subcultures because people literally vote with their thumbs and follow those individuals, being able to show that for upcoming publishers, for niche publishers who are also de facto leaders of their own respective subculture, would allow them to have much more value in the product they're offering to advertisers, allowing them to then put money back into their journalism to kind of grow and be bigger, better leaders of the communities that they service with the articles and the journalism they create. So yeah, I totally agree. It's
I
a lot
think
of work for us to be doing, but I think we know the right way to be pushing.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity. The open web is a place where publishers can drive that can maximize the revenues, right? When you work in a walled garden environment, you have you have a little bit of a trade-off there in terms of your control of your content, how it's monetized, et cetera. And so I think in the spirit of freedom of information, just ensuring that information is available, I think advertising can do a great service to content producers of all sorts, right? And I think that where the web is an open playing field where you can do it. And it could be the next platform, right? It could be any number of things that could be made available in a more transparent and efficient ecosystem.
Totally agree, and I think that is probably a very nice way to round it off. I know you've got your day job to get back to, Andrew, and we've taken up near enough an hour of your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I think the insights you've got from a storied career are hugely valuable. And again, I'll say that we're over the moon to have you be part of the Alkimi Exchange team, and yeah, really excited for what we can do in the future together.
Yeah. Feelings mutual. I'm really excited to be working together. I want to do good things for publishers, and I think advertising is a great opportunity to make that change. I think that's something that there's a long road ahead of us. Clearly, things are continue to change and evolve, and I think it can only get better from here.
Keeps it interesting, right?
Yeah.
Keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers.
Have a good one.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.